Welcome to That Pivotal Moment of Change, the podcast where we dive into the career-defining moments that shape who we become. Success, setbacks, big decisions, we unpack it all. Let's get into it.
All right, so I'm really excited about this one. I'm Ryan. As Amanda mentioned, I oversee design and research at Priceline and host a podcast. So super excited to be able to do this today and get to talk to Prayag. Podcast is really drilling into not so much about what you do, how you got to where you are, challenges you faced along the way, setbacks that became opportunities. So it's been really fun having these conversations and excited about this one. So do you want to start by just talking about what you're up to today?
Sure, absolutely. Before I get into that, I want to answer the burning question for all of those who were at the party last night. I am not wearing the same clothes. I have two of the same T-shirts, so I'm not, yeah. My name is Prayag. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Marvin, or HeyMarvin. We are a research repository. We are a research co-pilot. You can check out more about us at heymarvin.com. We have a booth right next to, across the street from the coffee place, so it's kind of easy to get there. Check us out, and then we'll talk about what we do and in detail of what it means to be a repository and research co-pilot on hopefully in the session today.
Yeah, definitely. So let's start with your background and how you got into research.
How I got into research, I think a better question, how I got out of research, because there was like a brief period of my life, very brief period where I was actually not doing research. So my background is in research. I went to school for research. In fact, I came to the US to study research at Berkeley. I taught design research at Berkeley. I was supposed to get a PhD in research. And I was going to become a professor. That was kind of be my career journey. And I do think like part of my dad expects me to go back and finish and become a professor. I don't think that's happening, but don't tell him. How I got into research, I had a computer science background, and I was very interested in this idea of HCI, the human-computer interaction. Like, we're building all these products, but like, how are people using it, right? And back in the day, we didn't have HCI as like this field that you could go study. So I moved to Helsinki, Finland, and did some research there. And back in the day, for the younger people in the audience, if you wanted to learn HCI, you went to Scandinavia, because that's where, and especially Helsinki, because that's where Nokia was. And that was like, back in the day, they had like 70% market share, and they did amazing HCI research. The trouble with them was they would like do this research, they would have amazing findings, they would put those findings in a closet and then lock the closet, never visit it again. And there's a lesson there somewhere. And then when I was doing that research, I was like, oh, around me, everybody has like a master's degree or a PhD. So like, I better get an advanced degree. And then that's how I got to the US, and the rest is history. Hopefully, history in the making.
But you became an entrepreneur, which is really interesting. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is your first company was demand generation and marketing. So what made a researcher open up a company focused on demand generation?
Oh, that's an interesting story. I would not recommend researcher go into marketing and sales unless you have to. In fact, though, I will say a lot of like selling is like probing and answering questions. So I do actually get a bunch of people who have design background be like, how do I I don't like selling. Like, you do, but you just don't know it yet, right? How did we get into marketing? So we were actually doing AI. Like, when we first launched, it wasn't actually an HCI problem that we were trying to solve. What we were trying to do is build data sets for AI to get trained on, right? This is like 2011, 2012. back when like anybody had any faith in AI, right? And nobody was doing AI. Honestly, like we had like one customer that was like doing like real AI, and nobody else was like interested in that. So we had this like, which is funny, like 3 years later or 4 years later, Scale AI launched. They were doing the exact same thing, and they're like a $20 billion company now. So that just goes on to tell you like how important timing is when you're like launching a product. And there's a lot of things that you can control, but there are a lot of things you can't control, like where the market is and when the timing is. So we were like, well, we have this ability to build this really interesting data set, with really clean data sets, and where can we apply? And we went and launched like 4 different products. And the product that won out was like, hey, we need a ton of like sales and marketing data, which is still true today as it was, 10, 12 years ago. And that was like, all right, well, we got to do something, and we have this technology, and here's the market. So we basically pivoted, kept the same technology, pivoted into that market. And that was my life for 10 years. That was crazy. It's like, it was teaching people how to do sales when I had never done sales before.
And what would you say the biggest lesson you learned was during your time starting a business for your first time?
That's a great question. A lot of lessons. I would say there are a couple of lessons that I think are relevant for today. I think yesterday somebody was asking about like leadership and what does it mean to, how do you become a leader?
Right.
And I've been thinking about that, and that was one of the big lessons I took. So I became the CEO at like 27. I knew nothing, and I'm not like being humble. Like I literally knew nothing, right? Didn't know. I'd never had like a real job. I'd worked in like research institute. I had worked like as like a low-level coder in like a services company, but I had like no product development experience. I hired a lot of like leaders, and one of the things that kept surprising me was how much of leadership was just like doing stuff, than like having like a title. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a lot of, and part of it, we would just like we built this product and we just showed up. And I was like, hey, I'm the CEO. And they didn't ask, like, oh, you're CEO of a 4-person company? Oh, okay. They're like, oh, it's the CEO. And like, oh, you are the leader. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm a leader of like a group of like 3 people who none of who report to me. But, they were like, oh, and I just like basically started talking about what we have built, and we just started building stuff, and people like, oh yeah, these are like, and people like, we got a ton of press. And like, oh, these people are like leaders in the space. And we actually had a social enterprise. Like, they are leaders in social enterprise. Right. I mean, it was just, most of it was like doing stuff and showing up. And that's what a lot of people in my companies have done. I think, it's less about having a title. It's more about just showing up and like doing stuff that nobody is doing. And that is, I would say, like 80% of leadership.
Yeah, I love that. One of my favorite quotes is leadership isn't a position, it's a choice,
right,
by Stephen Covey, and it just makes so much sense. So how did starting that first company, what you learned there, what made you want to do it again, and how did that lead into where you are now with Marvin?
So I left I left Lead Genius, my first company. I left I am more pushed out is probably a better word for it. But let's say I left my company. Let's say it was, how when you get dumped, you're like, oh, it was consensual. It's like, yeah, this is basically the same thing.
So nice way to put it.
So I got dumped. And it was a 10-year-long journey, and I took a little bit of a break. And I told my wife, I'm like, hey, I want to do something new. And the first question she asked, she was like, okay, for how long are you going to try and do this before you actually get a job? Like, she was like, no. She didn't ask me what I'm trying to do, what the goal is. Like, no. What is the deadline after which if you don't get a salary by that point, you're going to go and find a job? Like, December 31st. This was like January or February, right? And I was exploring a bunch of ideas. I think one of the big things, so there was a challenge I was facing at Lead Genius where I was trying to like ask my product managers, what have our customers said? Like everybody was asking the same question, like, hey, what have our customers said about this? And there was literally, other than going and tapping people, like, do you talk to the customer? What did they say about this? There's literally no way to kind of have that access to customer feedback. Because, we had multiple systems. We had like a support system. We ended up getting like Gong for product team because they wanted to record some of those conversations. So we had that Gong system that was being less used by sales, but more used by product. Then we had like our Salesforce. Then we had, our NPS. And this is a mess. And I was very motivated to actually like build a centralized location where I and everybody else could go and like see what the market feedback is. And it was just so hard. And so that, like, I filed that problem back on my head. Like, if I ever want to do something, this is a worthy problem to solve, right? But I was exploring a ton of problems. I think the biggest reason I decided to solve this problem was I wanted to work with my tribe. Like, I wanted to get back into research. I'd done like sales and marketing, and I have some of my sales and marketing people here. No offense, we love you guys, but like I really, really love the design, the research, the builder community. And I'm like, if I'm gonna spend another 10, 12, 15 years doing something, I would rather do it with people in community that I really love and appreciate. And I'm not just saying that because like I'm not buttering you guys up. Genuinely, it's like if you got to do it for 12, 15 years, which is what every great product, great company takes. Like, you got to do it for the right reasons.
They may have answered what I wanted to ask you next, because we all have tough days, and sometimes just getting up like, oh man, like I have to get through this again today. When you're running a business, I imagine there's some very difficult, trying times where you have to ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? So what keeps you going during those times where you're questioning what you're doing?
I mean, yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes just freaking grit. Like, I'm going to grind my teeth, and I'm going to try to get to 9 p.m., and then I'm going to go to bed. And, like, tomorrow is future Prayag's problem. I'm going to just, like, get through today. And that happens from time to time. So I think, like, honestly, a lot of things, like, freaking get to the end of the day and go to bed, right? Yeah. Like, that's freaking what you can do. But I think you can't do this for like, and there were times at my previous company, especially at the end, where it was like, dude, like, I don't know if I can do this for too long. At that time, I think with Marvin especially, it keeps coming back to like, oh, we are working with people that are genuinely, I would have gotten a job as a researcher or a design leader or whatever. And if this is going to be my life's work, then, once you're like, this is it, right? And that's what gets you through the day. And
cool. All right, so let's get into some of the spicy stuff here. Okay. So a lot of the times, from what I understand, startups usually a researcher is one of the later hires that a startup makes. Could you talk about why you think that's the case or disagree?
So that's a great question. So at Lead Genius, our first product hire was a researcher. So because I'd come from research background, like, we should build out a good research practice before we build out even a good product practice. But ultimately what ended up happening was that researcher became responsible for not just like understanding customer problems, but also trying to figure out like how to solve those problems, working with the rest of the organization to try and figure out, hey, engineering-wise, product design-wise, what do you do? And his mandate got so broad that ultimately we were like, well, you're like a product manager at this point, right? So I think what ends up happening is even if you build out a research function in a small company, you end up doing so much that it like goes beyond just research, and that's just the nature of the beast. And so the short of it is research becomes a responsibility that goes across the organization in a startup. Right. Like it's a CEO's role, it is the product head roles, it's a product manager's role, it's like salespeople's role, right? And I think that's why I think researchers are great hire, and we have hired a ton of researchers at Marvin, but they're doing like product management.
Right. Okay. So one thing that comes up a lot is the democratizing research.
Right.
I think one of the challenges with that is quality. So my question, and I realize this is maybe a broad question, but is bad research better than no research at all?
That's a great question, because what I'm talking about is like, oh, everybody should do research, but like, can everybody do good research? Can everybody do thorough research? So back in grad school, I had asked I had a qualitative research professor, and we were talking about like doing research and like how to do you need to go in depth, and then and I was like, like I have this project that I'm doing for my design class, like there was like tangible user interfaces class, and like I don't really, like, I'm a student, I can't even pay people like $20 to, like, if I pay $20, I'm not eating tonight. So how do I go and do the research, right? And she was like, well, just go like find the next person that's sitting next to you and just show them the design, see what they say. And I'm like, is that real research? They're like, yeah, it's called guerrilla research, right? And
right.
and I'm like, guerrilla, this is just like freaking tapping somebody on the, like, give me feedback, right? Like, no. There is like study about guerrilla research, and it actually works, right?
Right.
A ton of studies about guerrilla research. So that is to say, is bad research, I mean, definition of bad research varies. So if you are like, a designer and go to a customer or a user and with their puppy eyes, like, please, do you like my product? Do you like my design? And they say, yes, of course, we love you. That's probably not super helpful. But if there is a baseline met, in my opinion, I think that research has value. And now where researchers come in is kind of, they can help you curate and be like, oh, actually, maybe less emphasis on this, more emphasis on this. So the job of a researcher, in my opinion, is changing too. So, yeah.
So do you think there's an opportunity there for AI to help correct bad questions, or to help make sure that the problem you're trying to solve is the correct problem and you're tackling it the right way with customers that you're talking to?
100%. And that's partly, that getting into like what Marvin does. Promise is not a pitch. But one of the things that Marvin does, it helps kind of create these guardrails for our users to kind of make them better researchers, and that includes like this is like a throwaway feature that we launched, which was like, we'll give you feedback on your interview, and the AI would like analyze the interview and be like, oh, maybe ask this question this way, and this is a leading question, maybe just like don't spend too much time blabbing on about the product. But at the same time, so I feel like and then what we found was people were way better at taking feedback from AI than they were from their like peers in the research team, right? Yeah. They were like, oh, it's just AI telling me. It's like I'm not taking it personally. It's just an AI answer, right? So there are all these like tools that we have built and the industry has built that helps build these guardrails. And that's what I mean by, like, I think the role of a researcher is changing. I think the role of a researcher today is as much of like truth seeker as it is to like help others seek truth, right? Be the guru, be the mentor, be a comrade, like review people, be a teacher. And I think that's AI can do some of that, but I think also researchers' role is kind of probably turning into that.
So one thing that I think is really interesting, and we've talked about this before, but how about bias? Do you think there's an opportunity for AI to remove bias from research?
I have a spicy take on bias.
Let's hear it.
Okay. I think removing bias and trying to completely remove bias is futile. I don't think you can remove bias. I don't think you can completely remove bias. I think what you can, and that's as true for qual research as it is true for quant research. I think like the way you phrase questions, the way like where you are, how you find people, like, we live in a real world and you cannot completely remove bias from your research. What you can do is address bias, right? So if you're coming in and you're a designer and you have you're testing a couple of designs, if you have a preference for one over the other, address it. So be like, hey, I like this design. So it's possible that when I tried to minimize it, but it's definitely possible that I might have introduced slight preference for this design, right?
Yeah.
So I think removal of bias should not be the goal. Maybe try and minimize it, but definitely address the bias.
So it's a transparency.
Yes, it's absolutely. It's a transparency issue rather than a methodology issue.
Okay, and a few more, and I know we're coming up against time here. So another thing that is talked a lot, we're hearing a lot about these days is this idea of synthetic users. So essentially LLMs that are trained to come in and mimic a population and give feedback. You're hearing about it in both quant and qual. What do you think about synthetic users?
It's a great question. So my undergrad is in computer science, and one of the things that has been proven time and again in AI is synthetic training data actually works very nicely. And a lot of what LLMs today get trained on is synthetic data, right? So to me, but they're not a replacement for real. Like you can't just train AI purely on synthetic data. Where I've seen a couple of very compelling use cases for synthetic users is turning quant research, where it is not statistically significant, adding your synthetic data on top of it to turn it into a statistically significant data set. And that sounds weird, but it is, like, statistically it works. So that's one application that I've seen that really works. I think the other application is like trying to figure out if you have the right discussion guide. Or right like methodology, you like basically simulate your research on the first 5 synthetic users. See where we go. There are other use cases that we can talk about, but there are ways in which you can do this. But yes, those are the 2 main use cases I see.
Okay, and I think we might be just about at time here, but I have one more question. I feel like if I don't ask this question, I'm just doing the wrong thing, because this is the question that everyone always asks. So, is AI coming for your job?
No, but it doesn't hurt to look over your shoulders. No, seriously.
Explain that one.
I think people in the room, I think we are all going to be fine. I think once AI can do a lot of things, what it doesn't have is judgment and taste, right? So I think as long as you're like tastemakers, you're going to be fine. And I think most people in this room, or all of us, are tastemakers, right? I think what my challenge, I feel, is how do you get people, how you give them enough experience for them to become tastemakers, right? Like when you're like fresh out of school, I didn't have any taste. I was a negative tastemaker. Like, don't ask me. So how do you go from there to like, hey, I have a judgment? And I think because AI is going to do like junior jobs so well that like we won't be able to train people, train fresh college grads on stuff that helps you get to that tastemaker level, right? That worries me. I have some kind of answer to that, or at least some theory on how we can help that. But no, as long as you're like you're making judgment, you're building taste, I think you should be fine.
It's a great optimistic answer. I'm sure everyone is happy to hear that one. See, the clock is at 0. Amanda standing. Do we want to do questions, or
do we have time for questions, or should we? It's fine. I'm going to be park myself at the booth. So if you have any questions, come see us. Get a coloring book, get some swag, talk to us. Yeah.
The top-rated question.
Okay.
Okay. So what do we? It looks like. Okay. So what advice do you have for a scrappy UX generalist at a startup or small company, and how do you learn quickly and effectively?
Those are 2 questions. Good job.
They snuck it in.
If you're a UX generalist, I think your primary job, especially in a small startup, is not talking to your users. It is to help everybody in your organization to have better conversations with their users, right? So become that trainer, become that guru, become that person, that annoying person, like, hey, what did you learn? Can we put this somewhere? Help people become better researchers. I think that would be kind of that's the job of the future, especially in a startup. So that'll be one big thing I'll say. And how do you learn quickly and effectively? Conferences like this, read research papers. Like, go to your favorite Scholar, Google Scholar. There are actually a lot of them are written to be very accessible.
Yeah.
So I don't see enough people doing that. So that's why I'm going to put that out there.
I would also add to that, for anyone who's starting off in UX, be a generalist. I think it's the best way to start off, because you could kind of learn a lot of different things and really figure out what you're most interested in, and that becomes what you really want to look at and figure out what you want to pursue or go after next.
Absolutely.
So, Prayag, thank you so much. I'm glad we got the chance to do this.
That's it for today's episode. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop a comment with your thoughts, like this episode if it resonated with you, and share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to follow so you never miss an episode. Thanks for being part of this journey with us. Until next time.